Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Zendaya, Josh O'Connor and Mike Faist are proving that 2's tennis and 3's a crowd in Luca Guadagnino's Challengers. In 2006, best friends and tennis partners Patrick Zvai and Art Dawson, played by Josh O'Connor and Mike Faist respectively, both fall instantly for rising star Tashi Duncan, played by Zendaya. They both compete for her affections, which disintegrates their friendship, while Tashi suffers a career-ending injury. 13 years later, Tashi manages her husband Art, whose career is in a slump, and enters him as a wildcard into a challenger event in New Rochelle to build his confidence, only to put him on a collision course with Patrick in the final and the culmination of their rivalry over Tashi. Challengers is the latest from Luca Guadagnino, and if you look at his filmography, you can very much tell that he's interested in bodies and personalities clashing, going all the way back to the last film of his I reviewed, A Bigger Splash, all the way back in 2015. Yes, even before Call Me By Your Name, which I still haven't seen yet, but don't tell anyone. But Guadagnino is definitely fascinated by desire and allure. It's a through line in many of his movies, going all the way through to Bones and All, which, despite the cannibalism theme, had a definite sense of romanticism to it, which made it even more disturbing. But Guadagnino definitely doesn't shy away from sexuality in his movies. Instead, he confronts it, which is very unusual for a mainstream film director in this day and age, especially when many people have commented on how sexless a lot of mainstream movies are in this day and age. But this and Saltburn, both MGM movies, definitely buck that trend, and it seems like Guadagnino is very committed to making an erotic drama that's very much made for grown-ups and is made with a certain expectation of maturity on the part of its audience. In other words, it's made for adults. But what's also notable about Challengers is that it's produced by Zendaya. And I'm not talking about a vanity executive producer credit, I mean a full-blown producer credit for Zendaya. And that's significant because this is her first major solo starring vehicle. She's the focal point of the movie, especially in the marketing. The poster is literally her face with the 2 tennis players reflected in her sunglasses. She is the central attraction of the movie, and it does feel in many ways like Zendaya is using this film to establish what she'll become. She is taking the opportunity to create the roles that she wants to play, the points that she wants to score. Challengers is very much a statement of intent for Zendaya. Early on, there's a moment where Tashi is talking to the 2 boys and says, "You don't really know what tennis is. It's a relationship." And in many ways that epitomizes Challengers in that, yes, it's about tennis, but it's also very much not about tennis. It's about the relationship between these 3 characters, both as doubles, but also as a love triangle. And it makes sense for these characters that are so rigidly committed to their sport that they view everything as tennis, even their attempt to win Tashi. That is the prize that they're really playing for. So it makes sense that the entire structure of the movie is also tennis. Challengers has a very unusual narrative structure, but a very deliberate one. It actually starts off fairly slowly. It builds up the characters in 2019, leading up to the Challenger event, and then goes to the final and plays out as flashbacks with each game that Art and Patrick play, which of course backs up what Tashi says about tennis being a relationship. It literally uses the game as a way of exploring the dynamic that has built up between these characters. That deliberate structure is a genius trick. It evokes tennis in the sense that it starts out very slowly and builds momentum as it goes along. It requires a little bit of patience and a little bit of concentration to keep up with what's happening on screen and following the timeline of the movie, but ultimately you're rewarded for it, because by the time the movie reaches its conclusion, it really is building up to this massive crescendo. But it's also about the back and forth between these characters as well, and I'm not just talking about the way that Tashi goes between the two men depending on their circumstances in terms of the plot, but I'm also talking about the way that individual scenes are structured. The script is really well written, it's full of lively, sparky dialogue, the repartee between the actors is fantastic, and they often deliver their lines to each other like volleys, which is accentuated by the editing, the way that scenes are cut, especially their interactions with Tashi, particularly Art in 2019. And so in that way, everything becomes a game. Everything becomes tennis. And yeah, you could say that's just conventional dialogue editing because it's just shot, reverse, shot. But in many ways that feels deliberate and pointed in the case of Challengers, which is all about those ideas of who is actually in control. And for much of the movie, that is Tashi. We definitely see a different side to Zendaya in this movie. I've been saying for a long time now that Zendaya has great screen presence. She's just really magnetic in front of the camera, but in Challengers, we get a sense for the first time of just how talented she really is, because this is a very complicated role, but she absolutely commands the film. The teenage version of Tashi is very much closer to what Zendaya has done in the past, and I do think that's a very deliberate conscious choice because that allows for her a place to start from. When we meet Tashi in those flashback scenes, she's very much a star on the rise, and everyone knows it. Sponsors are lining up. She has the future at her feet, and Art and Patrick are instantly attracted to her, and it's understandable why, because she's a shooting star. She's someone that pulls everything into their orbit, and she knows just how desirable she is, not just in terms of her career, but also in terms of her body. You can tell that she's someone that is aware and is in full command of her sexuality, especially in the much touted threesome scene early on in the hotel room. She is fully in command of that situation. She is playing and toying with them, and that's a really great scene. She has both of them in the palm of her hands because she knows their sexuality can control the both of them, and also because she is quite flattered by the attention. But Tashi knows exactly what she wants. She knows what her goals and ambitions are, and she knows how to achieve them, and how to use people to that end. She's very much a careerist, and sometimes that can make her quite ruthless and maybe even manipulative. There's that moment where Art is trying to convince her that Patrick is not in love with her, to which she snipes back, "What makes you think I want someone in love with me?" Tashi is someone that very much sees relationships as an opportunity, as a way of forwarding herself. And so in that sense, Tashi is very much serving herself. She is not the prize, she is very much the one calling the shots and deciding the rules. And in a much lesser movie, Tashi could have just simply been the villain of the piece, the man-eater, the antagonistic force that breaks up the friendship between these two men for her own amusement. But Tashi is much more than that. Her character is much more complex and nuanced, and actually, I found her to be, to some extent, a quite tragic figure. She spent her entire life being groomed for success. Everyone has told her that tennis stardom is in her grasp. It's only a matter of time, and then suddenly, in a split second, it's all taken away from her, and that means that those dreams have been quelled unless she finds another way of obtaining them, and at that point she becomes dependent on Art and Patrick, and Art in particular because he's the one that comes to her aid at her most dire moments of need. I think that in the beginning their relationship maybe was actually built on a sense of respect between the two of them, but what's interesting is the way the relationship evolves over time and into the 2019 scenes where Tashi has transformed herself in light of her injury and not for the better. Tashi has spent much of the intervening time reconstructing the image of success that was foretold for her. Early on, there's a moment where she's actually looking over the notes of a publicity image between the pair of them. She has constructed this idea of Art and Tashi as as being a power couple, that their marriage is a symbol of strength, that they are people that win and succeed, but the reality is that their marriage is not that, and instead it's a rather harshly codependent relationship, because Tashi relies on Art to play tennis for her. He is playing on her behalf, effectively making him an avatar for her, but also meaning that Art is extremely reliant on Tashi's validation, and Art is going through a slump because he's not only lacking that in his own marriage, but he's also lacking confidence within himself, and that threatens the entire thing. And Tashi is especially irritated by Art's fecklessness. Zendaya's performance makes clear that Tashi's worst qualities have effectively metastasized since her injury, since she's even more coldly cynical and ruthless about her career ambitions, and her interactions with Art are often peppered with resentment and disdain, especially about the fact that he can play and she can't. And Zendaya's performance is so richly nuanced, you can tell that she's stepping up to adult drama. This shows her full potential, and I think that it's clear that not only is she up to the level of this movie, but also shows that she has so much more to give in the future. She can only get better from here. But it isn't just about Tashi, it's about Patrick and Art, and as much as they're competing for her, it's about competing with each other. You see, Patrick and Art are really good friends. Really good friends, which is to say their relationship is extremely homoerotic, and they appear to be the only ones that haven't noticed that yet. And Guadagnino makes it very overt over the course of the movie. In fact, the first time we move to a flashback, they're celebrating winning their doubles game together, and Art literally jumps into Patrick's arms and they fall to the floor together. If the two characters got any more friendly with each other, they'd be reenacting the rug wrestling scene from Women in Love. In fact, that's the moment that the hotel room encounter most actually brings the memory of. But certainly there are several moments that allude to the homoeroticism between the two characters. There's that moment in the cafeteria where Art and Patrick are teasing each other over Tashi, and they are carrying these churros in their hand, just sticking out incredibly phallic-like. In fact, if they were any longer, I'm pretty sure they'd be crossing swords with each other, if you know what I mean. There's another moment where Patrick taunts Art by eating a banana while they're waiting on the side of the court. It's that kind of subtlety all throughout the entire movie. And the two men are different sides of the same coin. They complement each other, which means they work beautifully as a doubles pair, but when they're separated, they're lacking something that the other has. Patrick, for example, in the later scenes of the movie, he's never really had his big break. He's in his 30s and he's still struggling in the minor leagues, essentially, and he's never really had a chance to prove himself. He's very charismatic and he knows how to charm his way into a situation, and certainly he has that power over Tashi, despite the fact that she's pushing him away, especially in the 2019 scenes. Somehow he finds a way of getting under her skin. Somehow he finds a way of pushing himself back into her orbit, and she finds herself unable to resist at points. There is definitely something about Patrick that has some kind of allure, even though he's not openly successful, despite the fact that he's running from a quite privileged background. While Art, on the other hand, is the more compassionate of the pair, but he's also quite sensitive. He also needs extreme emotional validation, and that is why he's caught in a loveless marriage to Tashi in the later scenes of the movie. And both Josh O'Connor and Mike Faist are brilliant in their respective roles. Again, they complement each other fantastically. This is a movie that is very much a three-hander between these characters. Everyone else is extremely peripheral. It's all about this core relationship. And again, it isn't just about Tashi, it's about Art and Patrick, because it's also a game between them. It is all about trying to beat each other. And I mean the innuendo there. One of the most memorable things about Challengers is its score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, re-teamed with Guadagnino after Bones and all, and you would think with a movie set in the tennis world, it would have a quite classical score, given it's set in the world of the upper crust, but it's pretty clear that all involved with Challengers very much set out to make a tennis movie that didn't feel staid. Instead, the score is actually club and techno based. It provides a pounding backbone to the entire movie, and certainly it caught me by surprise, especially because I wasn't expecting a score that felt so modern for this kind of movie, but it really does work. It amplifies that competitive spirit throughout the entire film, whether it's on the court or off it, whether it's a tennis match or a dialogue-based scene. Everything feels sporting because of this score. Everything feels like an adrenaline rush as it pounds throughout the entire movie. It does have a quite repetitive rhythm, but it gets you hooked into the action immediately. It makes everything feel very dramatic and important, and it amplifies the fact that everything is all part of the game. It makes the movie feel incredibly exciting, even though much of it is just characters talking to each other. If I did have a complaint with the score though, occasionally I found the mixing did overwhelm the dialogue in certain instances because the pounding bass does take out some of the dialogue from the characters, at least in the screen that I attended. Which brings us to the tennis in the movie, which is extremely heightened, not just by the music, but also just the way that it's staged and executed. Guadagnino puts a lot of emphasis on bodies and physicality, on their athleticism of muscles and bones as they jump and leap around the court, and of their bodies glistening and dripping with sweat. There's a lingering slow motion shot where Art looks down to the camera and the sweat is dripping onto the lens. It's extremely sexualized, but also it's very melodramatic and over the top as well. The characters do enough cursing and racket smashing on the court that would make John McEnroe blush. It's all part of making sure that tennis feels very cinematic and exciting, and by the time of the big finale between Art and Patrick, Guadagnino pulls all the tricks out of the bag. You can tell that he's thinking to himself, how do I not make a boring game of tennis? He has whipped things up to an almost camp crescendo in the finale of the movie with really unusual camera angles. Have you ever seen a tennis match from the POV of the ball? You get it for a brief moment in Challengers. There are several very distinctive shots that are actually shot underneath the court, which has the effect of making Art and Patrick look like gods. It's all about the movement and physicality of them, and the editing in that moment is really good at making the audience feel hyped as it moves even higher to an absolute fever pitch before the final seconds of the movie. The moment that Challengers reveals what it's all about in those final seconds, it comes to an absolute catharsis that is extremely satisfying for the drama, but also for the game at hand, which isn't necessarily about tennis. I think it's pretty obvious by now that Challengers isn't just any old movie about tennis. It might be the best movie about the sport ever made, but that might also be because it isn't actually about that. Instead, what it is an adult erotic drama that genuinely turns up the heat at the right moments. It's a very playful and sexy movie that's anchored by three very strong performances from each of its cast, especially Zendaya. Not that I had any doubts about her before, but if you did, I think they'll all be dispelled by the end of Challengers that proves that she has the talent to back up that star power. In addition to that, you've got the pounding score, a very twisty script, and Guadagnino directing the hell out of this movie with eye-popping camera work that accentuates it into being this incredibly engrossing, highly watchable film. Match point to Guadagnino. If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip at my Ko-fi page or my YouTube Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video, or you can buy me a churro over at my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can join YouTube memberships for similar perks, or you can simply like, share and subscribe it all helps. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.